Tim, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me this morning and really excited to talk to you today and learn more about your story. You've got a pretty fascinating background, but now very similar to myself, coming into the therapy space after pivoting from previous experiences. But I think there's something to be said about what we learn through those experiences that we can obviously bring in the therapeutic space. But then also interested to talk about the whole concept of your podcast, American Masculinity, and how you've stepped into this space. Because again, that could be controversial at times too, especially in the space we find ourselves in today's world and all these conversations people are having around masculinity, what it is, what it isn't. So it's definitely an interesting time to be in. But before we jump into any of that, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what's brought you here today.
Sure, man. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's nice to be on with somebody that's been doing this for a minute and learn from you. This has been great. uh, my name's Tim Wienecke. I'm a mental health clinician out here in Colorado. Specialize in helping men, vets, and first responders. Prior to that, I worked against interpersonal violence as an advocate. Got a few allyship awards doing various gender and sexuality allyship things. And before that, I was in the Air Force doing intelligence work. So to say it's been a varied journey is a reasonable statement.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you for sharing that. But what was your experience like being in the Air Force, especially in the intelligence side? What got you into it? And looking back, what are some of the key things you learned, not only about yourself, but the world in general?
Well, my going into intelligence work was a little unique. I joined up enlisted into the Air Force at 28,
Yeah.
which for anybody who knows anything about the military means I've made some dubious life choices to that point. Um, the Air Force saved my life. I graduated college with a mediocre degree, with a mediocre GPA in 2005. Came back to Denver, to a town with more college degrees per capita than either state in the country, at a time during an economics crash. So I landed pretty flat on my face for about a year and a half, 2 years before finally joining up with the Air Force. So I really do mean it when I say the Air Force saved my life. I
Mm.
didn't have anything else going on. It was really nice to find some meaning again.
Mhm.
I think the biggest thing that I took from my service was the importance of two things: hierarchies. Whenever you're talking about tasking, whenever you're talking about owning a role, being able to move things, at the end of the day, somebody has to be at the top of a decision tree. And if you're pretending that that doesn't happen, things tend to get really sloppy, really messy, and the ball doesn't move.
Mm.
And that doesn't mean that you don't have, joint leadership. It doesn't mean you don't have input. But at the end of the day, it's really worth respecting the people that are making the calls, and the difference between responsibility and authority and how connected they are.
Mm.
So a lot of people I work with really struggle with social expectations because they take responsibility for things they don't have authority over.
Mm.
If your choices can't impact an outcome, you are not responsible for what happens next. And you see it all the time. A lot of employees get pushed past capacity. That's why we get burnout. We have people grinding up against things that don't really move.
Yeah.
And the Air Force was really good about teaching that. Responsibility is very clear and it is very enforced.
Mm.
But it's also pretty good about acknowledging when someone has authority and when someone doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. So in that, what I hear is just having that clarity around where you draw the lines, because when the lines are blurred, then people are trying to they're guessing, but then they're also second guessing themselves, which can lead to a lot of complications. And again, I know we're going to touch on it, but that probably brings the discussion into the masculinity side as well. But again, just want to get a deeper understanding of your experience. So coming out of the Air Force, what then inspired you to go into supporting others through domestic violence and some of the stuff that was happening?
So it all got started while I was in the Air Force.
Okay.
I was about a year in, and I got to my first duty station, which at the time was Osan Air Base in Korea, South Korea.
Mm.
And during that time, it had the highest occurrence of sexual assault in the Air Force of any base. And it was because it's a first term duty station, which means that 18-year-olds can go there for the first time they've ever been activated into the military. It's a heavy, heavy drinking culture.
Mhm.
And it's only a year tour. So there's this constant rotation of new people. So no one really knows anybody that well.
Mhm.
And so it's a perpetrator's dreamland, right? A lot of vulnerable people in vulnerable situations who don't know the people around them. And when I found that out, it's what got me involved in doing sexual assault advocacy. So I got my start being an advocate for those who suffer from sexual assault.
Mhm.
In the military, everyone in uniform is a mandated reporter. And so as a clinician, you get that, but most people don't understand it. What it means is that if I'm in the military and a friend of mine comes and says, another service member assaulted me,
Mhm.
they are required to go to command and report that. And if they don't, and it's found out, they can be severely punished.
Mhm.
And so, as an advocate, because of the training that you get, you are one of the only people. It's us, chaplains, and mental health and medical providers are the only people in uniform can go to and talk without having the choice to report taken from them.
Mhm.
And so that's how I got my start in the human services. Where it really kind of turned, though, it was a few years later when I was in England. The Air Force got in a lot of trouble.
Mm.
So this always happens around sexual assault. An organization starts to culture shift,
Yes.
and then a ton of reporting happens, and it looks really bad
Yeah.
because now all of a sudden people are coming forward. And at the time, that's when the big scandal out of the Air Force Academy happened. That's when the big scandal out of basic training, where a few drill instructors were doing horrible things to trainees.
Mm.
And so the Air Force was actually one of the first adopters to the bystander approach for prevention,
Yeah.
which they predated a lot of college campuses on it. So I think the military doesn't get enough respect for some of the ways that it's been ahead of a lot of things.
Mhm.
But I got to train that. And so over the course of 2.5, 3 years, I got to train 3,000 airmen, 15 to 20 at a time on how to punch a rapist. It was my favorite job, right? I got to talk guys into punching rapists. It's a good gig.
Yeah.
Um, but it was during the training for that, since we were in Europe, the people training it were the people who developed it. There were the three
Mhm.
PhDs who developed out the entire program. And one of them took me to lunch during the training and was like, "Hey, what do you do?" I was like, "Oh, I do intelligence stuff. It's not great. It's just
Yeah.
computers."
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, you're doing the wrong thing. You need to be doing this kind of work."
Yeah.
And so just that tap of somebody saying, "Hey, there's other options for you,"
Mhm.
opened the door. And so when I got out of the military, I thought initially I was going to keep working in violence prevention. But at that point, I was pretty burnt out on the advocacy work.
Mm.
I like doing the training end, I like doing the prevention end, but I was really getting exhausted by hearing people's stories on the worst day of their life,
Yes.
which is what working a crisis line is.
Mhm.
And for any role that's a job for that, you have to be willing to do both.
Mhm.
And that's when I kind of sat around for about 6 months, which is pretty normal for folks making a big transition out of the military, taking 6 months to kind of figure out what you want your civilian life to look like.
Yes.
And that's when I picked counseling. I figured at the time it was going to be for school counseling,
Mm.
because the idea was like, oh, I just got done yelling at teenagers for 5 years. I think I could do that professionally and continue that on.
Yeah.
Uh, but I found that I like the individual work a lot more. And school counselors get absolutely destroyed. I think the average caseload for the average school counselor is over 3,000 students,
Wow. Yeah.
and the recommended caseload is under 300. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Fair
yeah,
enough.
not
Yeah.
a great place to go.
No, absolutely. And one of the things you touched on, it's interesting. I do want to explore that with you too, because it's going to probably feed into our overall discussion too. But like the sexual assault cases that were coming out of the military, and you hear a lot about that, right? A lot of things are happening in secrecy, and then it gets exposed. And unfortunately, the entire mission or the entire institution gets a bad rep that it's, oh, this is all bad. Just because you have some bad actors doesn't mean that's a representation of the entire institution or the mission behind it. What are your thoughts around that? Because I think we fall into that polarizing view, right? And it's hard not to, right? Because you start questioning everything that's going on just because there's been that exposure. But yeah, I just want to get your thoughts around that, and how can people be a bit more open? And I think most people are, but be more open around that these things do happen. Let's not be naive.
Yeah, I think the big thing that I took away from the whole experience, and especially moving into doing advocacy work on college campuses, is
Mhm.
the numbers are the same.
Right.
America has a problem with sexual violence.
Mm.
And so the military numbers on cases and occurrences based on age and demographic aren't any different than college campuses. It's
Mm.
the same age population and it's the same people coming forward. Now, there are unique complicating factors to what needs to happen for the military versus what has to happen on a college campus, and no one does it well. There is not a single institution that has figured out how to persecute and defend against interpersonal violence well. It goes against kind of our shared value of innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah.
And whenever somebody's experiencing something like that, every instinct you have to take care of yourself goes against collecting proof and reporting a crime.
Mhm.
You immediately want to isolate, pretend it didn't happen, take a shower, wash, get it off of you,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So the military isn't any different that way than the other institutions. And I really had to push that hard on college campuses because they often feel diametrically opposed, right? College
Mhm.
campuses tend to be very liberal. People tend to think of the military as very conservative.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is in the military leadership are the most educated people in the country.
Mm.
Every time an officer goes up in rank after their junior kind of operating time,
Yeah.
they get a new advanced degree for
Mm.
every single rank they go up.
Mhm.
So if you're talking to somebody that's a four-star general at the top of the food chain, they have the equivalent of two PhDs.
Mhm.
And so that's the other thing is when people think about the military and they think about the way they do policies, it's not a lack of education. The people that are making the decisions are incredibly educated.
Yeah.
It's our politics coming into those decision-making processes that get messy.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's part of the problem too, is the role politics plays in general, and how do you delineate between the two? And then just coming back to your story around becoming a counselor and working in the therapeutic space. Initially, you started working with women, and then you made the shift over to men. So, how was that? And what are the differences that you noticed in working between the two?
I think the differences are pretty profound.
Yeah.
I can't remember, are we allowed to swear here on your podcast?
Yeah. Yeah. Just be
Okay.
yourself.
It is not uncommon, at least once a week, for this sentence to come out of my mouth towards a patient. So you were the asshole there.
Yeah.
With this face, I cannot say that to a woman clinically.
Mhm.
Like nothing good happens in that room, right? But by talking like that with most of the guys I work with, it normalizes the situation. It makes them comfortable. There's a directness to it that's refreshing
Yes.
when it comes to these kinds of things.
Yeah.
And so the way that we educate counselors anymore is on the idea that we go crazy by culture, right? Cross cultural counseling.
Mhm.
And I think one of the ways that it's not discussed very well is the way that gender impacts culture and how we have to kind of reframe and move things around.
Mhm.
And it's really important when we talk about the differences between men and women in care and saying that when I say guys are more like this, I'm saying it in the way that I'm saying men are taller than women.
Mhm.
There are plenty of women that want that approach and plenty of men who would like a more empathetic approach,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
But generally speaking, men want more of a coaching relationship to start,
Mhm.
to build safety, to go emotional.
Yes.
Women want a more emotional, safe space to then be coached. You kind of have to flip them depending on the dynamic in the room.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest thing that was kind of refreshing for me.
Mm.
I think the other thing is when I started in interpersonal violence, I was often the only man that ever showed up
Mhm.
in most of the places. I was the first guy walking into that office looking to work and looking to help. And that has its own problems. Anybody who's the first of anything in a new organization knows that it's not fun being the token,
Yeah.
right? And that's true even when you're a privileged majority out in the world going into a minority space,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely.
I spent, I think, the first 20 years of my adulthood, or maybe a little bit less than that, 15, white knighting a lot. I
Mhm.
always cared about people. I always showed up for different causes. My first allyship award was at 21,
Mhm.
right? But I'm a big white guy. I'm like Captain Privilege over here. So every time I showed up at something, it was to go fight for somebody else. And inevitably, you can't join that community. It's not your community. And at a certain point, you cannot fight for other people's power.
Right.
They have to fight for it. You can back them up. You can stand shoulder to shoulder with them, but you can't push the ball forward.
For sure.
And so moving into veteran advocacy and men's advocacy has felt incredibly freeing because now I have something that I can talk about and talk about kindly, but that no one gets to tell me to shut up about.
Yeah.
Right? Like, no, this is happening and this is mine, and
Mm.
there's a lot of pain in the world, and these pains are real as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and to circle back on the whole privilege thing, I am
Mhm.
curious to understand how you navigated that, because a lot of my friends go through that, right? It's like, well, who are you to be here? You don't know what it feels like. You don't know my pain. So why are you speaking on behalf of it? And it's kind of like, okay, well, do you want someone to advocate for you or not? Right. And often we get lost in that whole space of, well, does this person even understand? Because, quote unquote, they're privileged. They don't know
Mhm.
what it takes or what it's been like. How
Yeah.
how were you navigating that space? Because you did touch on it a little bit too, right?
I mean, it's really interesting because it feels like very poorly in my life. I've been operating in spaces where me just showing up triggers half the people in the room,
Yeah.
right? I look like who hurt you.
Yes.
And I think the only reason that I got recognized in awards is because I was the only guy doing it at the time.
Mhm.
And so now, 10 years later, we have a lot of guys that can show up in those spaces and do well. And
Mhm.
so it's a very different thing than it was, 10, 15 years ago. Just by showing up, you were unique. Now there's an expectation of some kind of skillfulness in how to show up. And I think when it comes to privilege, privilege is really difficult to process because it's like a fish in water, right? The whole point of how privilege works is you don't notice that you have it until you lose it.
Mhm.
And so one of the quotes that I learned in my program that really helped me process it was the loss of privilege feels like subjugation.
Mhm.
When you've been treated special for so long, being treated like everybody else feels like a personal attack.
Yeah.
And that's why it goes so poorly for so many people is the first time they run into that and the first time they're made aware and the first time somebody calls them on it, they feel attacked. And sitting with that and holding that for a minute, processing it is really difficult. I'm a really liberal guy, so please, when I say this isn't me like being some kind of conservative guy throwing tomatoes at
Yeah.
liberals. Liberals are incredibly bad at forgiveness,
Mm.
right? The conservatives, for all of their everything else, there's a whole track of reconciliation and
Yes.
in welcoming back. And liberals talk about it a lot, right? Like we talk about justice reform, we talk about
Mhm.
rehabilitation,
Mhm.
but socially, that's not how it happens.
Mhm.
Somebody makes a mistake and they're out. They're just cut out.
Yeah.
And so some of it is, as the person in privilege walking into that, you have to kind of accept that that's very likely to happen while you're learning.
Mm.
And it's why it's so important that when you're moving into spaces that don't belong to you, that you make sure you're invited. Ideally, you have a guide of some kind, somebody to host you, somebody to advocate for you within that space, because you are going to make mistakes. And so
Yes.
if you just like bowl your way into different places with nobody there to kind of welcome you or speak for you, it's going to go poorly at some point. And it often did for me. There wasn't an organization that I worked at, even when I was getting all those awards, that there weren't critical issues that really hurt me and very likely were uncomfortable for the organization.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and I appreciate that, because often if you're it's easy to sit there and blame that you're the type of person that hurt me, so why are you here to help?
Mm.
And then that doesn't enable growth, because you remain stuck in being the
Yeah.
victim, and you're no longer taking on the role of being a survivor and empowering yourself. And that can be tough, right? So I'm
Mm.
sure you probably encountered some forms of that at times. And that could be, in generally speaking, even in the therapy space, I think one of the areas I have to navigate often is meeting the clients where they are and just being okay with whatever growth, whatever shape that takes in, they're willing to make, and not getting too attached to a specific outcome, because I know that's where they need to get to. So how do you balance that for yourself? Because that can be, it's always a challenge, right? Being in this space.
Yeah. The way I like to teach it to my students is the whole reason that therapy works is because you're not in their life.
Mhm.
We're supposed to be invested in outcomes from our people that we're socializing with, our communities, right? How people do and how they show up directly impact us. And so the only reason that counselors can hold that objectivity, if I've got a client that's struggling with a gambling addiction and they go blow their rent and they come in on Monday, I can sit there with that with them because I'm not the one whose rent's on the line,
Right.
right? And I think it's just like any other clinician, right? I fall into getting a little bit too invested in an outcome
Mhm.
here and there. I think that's a really natural thing to do. It's just
Yeah.
a matter of catching it.
Yes.
But I think it really helps knowing. I didn't start saying this until like 3 years of practice in, but I said it to one guy, and it was so impactful now that I say it as part of my intake process. In that I'm going to be the only person in your life you never have to take care of.
Mhm.
Everybody else in your life, on some level, there's some agreement where you're taking care of them. All you got to do is show up here and try,
Yeah.
whatever that looks like. But you don't have to take care of me. I got people that do that. We've got an hour. I can hold it together for an hour for you.
Yeah.
And that gives me the freedom to not get sucked in. It reminds me that that's my job. It reminds me that this is what that space is for.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think that's a powerful piece to remind individuals because, yeah, I see that a lot where clients will be apologizing for not making progress or the shame if they feel like they let themselves down, that by extension, they've let me down and they may not even show up for sessions. And you could see it show up in different ways. So reminding them that this isn't affecting me or you're not hurting me, but I'm just here holding you accountable. And we can discuss what that accountability looks like, or maybe the goals are too ambitious. So how do we renegotiate them? So yeah, I think it's a bit of a ongoing process with, and you constantly
Well,
have.
and I think that's why it's so important. Not enough clinicians continue their own therapeutic work, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think if you're in practice, you should be seeing a therapist at least once a month just to kind of keep your side of the street clean so you can
Yes.
hold it together. But I recently went through a divorce, and I remember sitting there with my therapist, and it was right after I made the call to end the marriage.
Yeah.
And I looked at her, I was like, how many times did you tell me to stop doing all the stupid shit that I tell my clients not to do every week? And she's like, every time, but you're special just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And I think feeling that on the other side of it and feeling the gift of it makes it easier to give that gift to your
Mhm.
patients.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we're all prone to having our individual blind spots, and having someone that can point them out is huge. I know in some of the groups I facilitate, there is that opportunity to get reflection back, even though you're facilitating the group. And that's powerful too, to be able to sit in the discomfort and be challenged and remind yourself that you're an equal. There's no hierarchy as far as this is concerned. So I do appreciate what you're sharing, because it is important to have those moments of reflection and feedback to recognize where your vulnerabilities are.
Well, and I think that's the beauty of group work. I think a big flaw of our field, people talk about the efficacy of therapy, but the problem is after your first year of practice, no one ever sees you practice again in most
Mhm.
cases.
Mhm.
You're never in a space where a colleague can critique your work. Your patients can. They can say whether they feel good, they can say whether they get better, but they don't have the skill or knowledge to tell you whether you're a good therapist. At least when you're running groups, there's other people around who at least witness a little bit and give
Yeah.
you feedback that otherwise you'd be missing. So I really love that that's part of your work. It's got to be helpful.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's been huge. It's been huge. Keeps me on my toes, and keeps me humble for sure, which probably a good time to talk about your podcast. And let's get into what was the motivation behind it, and why did you name it American Masculinity, and how did that feel?
Well, I don't have much of an ego. So it actually just felt very uncomfortable. I was just surprised that the name was available, to be honest.
Yeah.
I wanted a name that highlighted where my expertise is. I think it's very easy when talking about gender and talking about these things to not acknowledge culture.
Mm.
There's a lot of the men's rights guys and a lot of the ways that people push it as men are like this, women are like this.
Mhm.
And instead of men tend to be like this, women tend to be like that.
Mhm.
And I wanted a name that just highlighted this is where my expertise is. This is the people I'm bringing on to have these conversations. And this is the cultural context for what we're trying to do.
Mhm.
And I think that's been largely successful. The main reason I got it started is, and I'm sure you've run into this, there just aren't many men doing therapy.
Yeah.
Like of our colleagues, it's 4 to 5 of us are women. And as a former uniform guy doing therapy, there's only, I think in Denver, there's probably less than 10 people that are former uniforms
Mm.
that are clinicians that don't work at the VA.
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And so I stay pretty full, and there's a lot of times where I have to tell guys no. And at this point in my career, I've been doing this 10 years. I'm a college professor, presenting at conferences on the topics. I'm not cheap, right? And
Yeah.
I have reduced rates for people of certain demographics, but there's a lot of guys that I'm not getting to,
Mhm.
and a lot of guys that need to hear more about their mental health journey and have
Mhm.
it normalized. And so the person I have in mind when I make the podcast is those guys that either can't get to or aren't ready to start therapy yet, that want those conversations, that want some tools,
Mhm.
and want to make sure they don't feel crazy for feeling the ways that they feel about the things they feel them about.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And part of the thing you had mentioned to me before was this whole issue of the manosphere that's and I know you're touching on culture, which has been a huge part of that too. What are some of the issues that you were seeing and how are you trying to address those issues in your
Yeah.
podcast as well?
So I'm still a little scared to touch on some of it, to be honest. The
Mhm.
podcast is new, and a lot of the topics are nuanced and difficult to discuss. But one of the biggest things was how Me Too has largely been handled.
Mm.
So I was on the front end of it, right? I was
Yep.
working in crisis centers during it happening. And I remember when Me Too first started to be a thing, I was incredibly excited and happy.
Mhm.
We were finally going to get some of the like context of these monstrous men accountable. We were finally going to start to see more men engage and wake up to that. This is a thing and this is happening. And I think that's largely happened. We've seen some really positive changes. When I started back in '07 to '09, the data was only 1 in 13 or 17 men. I can't remember which. You'll have to fact
Mhm.
check me. But it was in the teens of one of every these experienced assault of some kind. Now the reporting is down to 1 in 4. And that's primarily because of what Me Too did and how we've relooked at statistics
Mhm.
and how it's made men more comfortable and aware coming forward, right? So that's the good end of Me Too, and something I think we should all be really proud of that have been involved in it.
Yeah.
On the other end of it, we started treating any kind of issue with the same voraciousness
Mm.
as we treat an assault. I have a pretty big problem with language as violence,
Yes.
right? And that's not a very popular opinion, particularly in interpersonal violence circles. I think language needs to be held accountable. I think language can certainly precipitate violence,
Mhm.
but you can't get charged for assault for calling somebody an epitaph. And that really bothered me. And I just started seeing more and more men come in who were men trying to be good guys that were so afraid of
Mhm.
being seen as a bad guy, so afraid of making a mistake
Mhm.
that they just get incredibly small.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the manosphere comes in is there was this kind of dynamic where as a guy, your choice was, hey, you've taken up too much space for too long, get small.
Yeah.
And I think for guys our age, that's a reasonable critique, man. I'm in my
Mhm.
40s. The 2000s were great for me, not so good for everybody else. It was a weird time.
Yep.
But saying that to a 15-year-old boy is incredibly destructive.
Yes.
He has done nothing to contribute to the system yet. And so all of these young men got either pushed and made small and were afraid to engage, afraid to do anything, especially with the advent of social media and cameras, right? I I have tremors sometimes thinking about what it would have looked like if somebody recorded me at 14 around girls.
Yep.
It was just so creepy as you figure it out.
Yep.
And so I think that's where the manosphere comes in is they get so tired of bottling it and then someone comes along to manipulate that.
Yep.
And it is manipulation. Like Andrew Tate and these call them delightful human beings who come in and really take advantage of these disenfranchised young men.
Yep.
And for me, when I was starting to get uncomfortable with all this, those were the only men talking about it publicly.
Mhm.
And there wasn't a discourse of any nuance. There wasn't a discourse of how to soften that.
Yeah.
And so I was just generally getting more and more uncomfortable in my practice. I could help other clinicians, right? I consult on masculinity quite a bit.
Mhm.
But as far as public outreach, impact, and having candid conversations with people, I was not really comfortable. And
Mhm.
what finally made the turn was Richard Reeves's book, Of Men and Boys. And he talked incredibly eloquently about it. He's a liberal policy wonk for a think tank who's really good at data. And he was the one that really named this, where toxic masculinity, colloquially, common vernacular, I don't know why I can't talk right now, that toxic masculinity in public is not agreed upon. It is simply used as a way to chastise men's bad behavior.
Mhm.
And there was no acknowledgement of what positive masculinity looked like. And so what that ended up doing is the ways in which guys are different, right? We tend to be more sexual, we tend to be more physically aggressive, we tend to be more status driven, and we tend to be less physically risk adverse, right? We're more
Mhm.
physically brave.
Mhm.
All of those started getting talked about very broadly as toxic.
Right.
There was like a 5-year stretch when you'd see single mothers posting about how they would stop their boys from horse playing because they were trying to cut off toxic masculinity at the root. And that's terrible.
Yep.
Those guys are never going to learn how to handle that part of themselves. That's what
Right.
play is. Play is learning.
Yes.
And so when I read that and I started listening for him, and then Scott Galloway and a number of other nuanced, reasonable men are coming forward and having these conversations around, yes, men have done a lot of bad things, and we've also done it to other men.
Mhm.
And these things need to be addressed.
Mhm.
The other really big statistic that kind of blew my mind is Title IX, right? The gender equality in education. When that was made, the numbers have entirely flipped. All of the reasons we initially did that for women have now put men, young boys, into those same numbers. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Once privilege is gone, we've developed an entire school system that is not designed for young boys.
Right.
Sit still and look at a board.
Yep.
If you've ever been around a 5-year-old, in particular a 5-year-old boy, that is not something they're good at.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so it's making, if we're paying attention, it's making us re-engage in how we want education to work. But we couldn't have those conversations until very recently.
Right.
And so I felt really called to action by them, and it felt very freeing.
Mhm.
And it also felt like, just with my background, I don't think there are a lot of guys that have been doing the things I've been doing. And so I'm hoping that gives me some credibility, that people, when they hear me talk about different struggles that men are having, that they can also see I'm coming from a place where I've seen and worked on the struggles of our country. And I'm not saying these other struggles aren't happening. That's
Yeah.
just not what I'm advocating for anymore.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and I appreciate that. I know you touched on many things, so I wanna try to address some of the key points. One of the things that you just shared, and I don't wanna lose sight of it, is you're right. We're asking these boys to sit still in a classroom. I remember even till now, I struggle with sitting still, right? Like I've just got all this energy and I need to be out playing sports just to find healthy ways of expending that energy so I can sit down and focus. But unfortunately, the downside I've seen, and I think we can talk about this as clinicians, is the over prescription or over diagnosis of ADHD
Mhm.
and the amount of kids, especially boys, that I see being put on medication just to get numbed out so they can just sit through the day. And I find that problematic because we're not addressing the root issue. We're just prescribing medication to these kids. And yeah, I just want to get your thoughts because I'm again being a clinician at times I have to be very careful about what recommendations I make with respect to medications because obviously I can't prescribe it or deny it.
Same.
I have to be honest with my clients that hey, I have a duty towards you, and this is my view before you go down the medication route because that's
Yeah.
the only solution they see at times to address whatever they're struggling with.
Well, it's the American problem of rushing. We want a now solution,
Yeah,
and pills can often be a now solution.
yeah,
So I think the biggest thing is we tend to treat boys like they are individually the problem instead of
mhm,
the systems involved. And so rather than looking at a classroom with 30 kids in it with one overwhelmed teacher at the front end
yeah,
who has to try to get every kid in that room to sit still, looking at that and saying, that's a problem. A third of the kids in this room aren't going to be able to do this.
mhm,
Instead, we say, this boy is out of hand, numb him. If he wants to be here, he needs to be numbed.
right,
The system can't handle him.
yes,
And when 1 in 3 boys is diagnosed with ADD, it's not a diagnosis anymore. It's just a different way of being.
mhm,
These things aren't diseases. This isn't like depression. This isn't something broken in your brain. there's kind of two things that really made it much more understandable for me. I really like Sebastian Junger's work, his original book, Tribe, on homecoming and belonging, and kind of this anthropological idea of everything in our meat sacks is designed to be running around in groups of 20 people with no shelter.
Mhm.
And so having 1 in 3 of the guys in that situation kind of pingy and looking around all the time is a really good idea.
Yeah.
It's a really adaptive idea.
Mhm.
And now we've built this fantastic world. I love that you and I can have this conversation states away. I love my roof. I'm not a camper. Okay. I'm never going back to running around after Buffalo or whatever. But we're not built for the world we made.
Yes.
And so I think that gives a lot of people peace when I frame it that way for them, that, hey, this isn't, you're not broken.
Yeah.
We're just in a world where the things that you're bringing to the table, you have to be very explicit about where you're bringing them. And I think the other thing about medication that goes kind of sideways is it's really good for some people. What it was, I think it was Mark Manson said this in one of his podcasts. And it was the first time I heard it, which made me really mad at my education,
Mhm.
where the way that we do medical intervention in mental health is we run all the studies on the most severe cases
Yeah.
because they're the ones that are like, these other treatment options aren't working. I'll try anything.
Mhm.
And then we extrapolate those treatments down to mild cases.
Yes.
And as any clinician who's paying attention at all and any good at the job will tell you, you treat mild anxiety very differently than you treat severe anxiety.
Mhm.
And if you treat mild anxiety like severe anxiety, it moves up to moderate pretty quick.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where the medication issues happen. And it's still the Wild West. We've only been doing psychiatric medication for less than 50 years.
Yeah.
It's a very new field. And there's a lot of really passionate, dedicated people. I have prescribers I love working with,
Mhm.
but it's difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've had some psychiatrists on this podcast, and obviously there's exceptions, and you have to kind of figure out you can't treat everyone the same, but ultimately their goal is to ensure they get their clients off medication, even if that is the approach being taken, right? And unfortunately, that's not the mindset that everyone has in the field, which is probably a separate issue. But
Well, I always struggle with that one a little bit. So, for context, I'm on mental health medication and I have no intention of ever getting off of it. I've struggled with moderate to severe depression throughout most of my life. And medication management has been a huge and incredibly helpful tool to let me live the life I want to live. And I think what's bothersome is people come into medical care with this value judgment on I should or should not be on medication,
Mhm.
instead of providers having the space, time, integrity, and ability to look at somebody and say, here's what you need for now while we sort this out.
Yeah.
And we're going to keep track of it. And maybe you'll get off of it. A lot of people do.
Yep.
Maybe you won't. The goal is to get you living the life that you want to live.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I think these treatments, the main problem is that when we talk about them in these hour-long blocks, right?
Yes.
It's really hard to get the nuance that an individual requires.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and I appreciate that perspective as well. And you touched on something about numbing children out, so then at times boys, but especially so they can follow along. And I feel at times that's become a social issue, and it's hard. And everything we've touched on thus far around being the outlier and speaking up, or being that one person who stands up against whatever you see that's happening to be, at least in your mind, that feels wrong. And it's like all about, no, just follow along, follow the herd. And yeah, I just want to get your thoughts around that in terms of how that can affect creativity, to a certain degree, even masculinity, and our ability to just create change in the world if you just continue to follow along with the herd.
Well, I think I'm going to turn off a lot of people with the framing I'm about to use. We'll see how it goes. I think a lot of this is patriarchy's fault.
Mm.
There's a cost to the privilege that men have had,
Yeah.
and it is isolating.
Hmm.
It is destructive. And I think America in particular, like our strength is we have the best people in the world come here to be one of us. And we've been doing it long enough that we've got a lot of talent and a lot of really cool things going on. And we're the most diverse country in the world.
Hmm.
The idea that that's not going to provide challenge We don't have the history. Like if you're French and you've been French, no matter what else your neighbor's doing, you all have that in common.
Right.
We don't have that here. And so the ways that Mexican boys are, the ways that African American boys are, the ways that Arab American boys are, and the ways that white boys are culturally
Mhm.
are different enough
Yes.
that when we talk about the herd, like which one,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's the problem with these overburdened systems is they don't have the resources and the people on deck to leave room for the beautiful and powerful individuality that we have as a country, and instead try to funnel everybody into being a factory worker when we don't even have factory workers anymore. Like, it's ridiculous. Everything within our school system is designed to corral and keep kids. And I think that's step one, right? One of the things I learned in my studying around being a school counselor is the beautiful thing about public schools is it's the only wellness check children get.
Mhm.
That's where we find out if they've got their vaccinations the way they're supposed to be. That's where we generally find when child abuse happens. That's where it's seen and when something's done about it. That's where we make sure children are fed. People that vote against school lunches, man, I can't. We're talking about feeding kids. Are you serious? Like, how is that a partisan issue?
Yeah.
Whatever. No. There's a lot of social services that happen within that. But
Mhm.
the problem is the main reason we have it is so that both parents can go to work,
Mhm.
right? And it boils down to glorified babysitting in poor districts.
Yes.
And so I think the thing that America does particularly poorly is I think we care for our children less well than almost anywhere else in the country because we're so focused on individual achievement.
Mhm.
And we love the story about the bootstraps, right? We love the person that comes from nothing that gets everything. And there's enough of them that we can point to
Mhm.
that say that everybody can be exceptional, which is not true.
Mhm.
I think most people can be exceptional in a lane. I think most lanes don't make you money.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's okay, right? Like, is money the ultimate goal? And I think a lot of times we lose sight of that as well. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, the focus seems to be on that material success, and
Yeah.
that's where we lose a lot of people.
Well, and that also goes back to the patriarchy. I'm working on a book right now talking about the trajectory and history of masculinity in America and how we've kind of gotten here. And a big part of it was with the industrial age
Mhm.
and the reduction of labor for various aspects. We decided that a family could be broken down into siloed roles. That a man can go be a provider and a woman can be a nurturer, and that both of them, with all of the progress we have on reduction of labor, should be able to do everything in those roles.
Mhm.
And women have been screwed because now they're expected to do everything. Not that they can do everything, they have to do everything.
Mhm.
And they're expected to do everything incredibly well, which is really unfortunate, but at least they have choices. For guys, we're just starting in the last generation to value dad again.
Mhm.
Up until very recently, it was incredibly unlikely as a father in an estranged marriage that you would see your children.
Mhm.
1 in 4 guys did not get to see their children when they left a marriage. They were just expected to be a provider, and the mother was to do everything else.
Mhm.
And that's incredibly bothersome to me. And going back to Sebastian Junger's work, right, when we're on this puppy pile of community, there's never been a point in human history before the last 200 years that 1 or 2 people was expected to give a child everything they needed,
Mhm.
ever.
Right.
And so I really love how dad's coming back into the picture, but it's really hard. I'm sure you see this with the guys you work with where they're like, all right, man, I'm being dad, but everybody's telling me I'm doing it bad.
Mhm.
I haven't hit my kid once,
Yeah.
right? Like I didn't do anything like my dad did, but
Yeah.
it's still not good enough.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and it is a huge issue. I see this quite a bit in the family law side of things too, and unfortunately, the system doesn't help. At least
No.
that's been my observation. And I mean, we still have a long ways to go, but I do agree. I think there has been a shift and more. And I think it really comes down, in my view, up to men to really take that on. No one's going to
Mhm.
come do it for you. You have to really push for it yourself. And
Yeah.
and
Well, this is
unfortunately,
one of the things that I get really angry about when I hear kind of white conservative guys talk about the African American male problem and why it's so bad. And they always talk about a lack of fathers within that community, right? Turns out that they're more involved in their kids than white guys are, statistically.
Mhm.
So within black communities, they've gotten really good cultural skill sets around how to co-parent with people out of the household because of how the system has screwed them, right?
Yeah.
And so anytime you hear like a white blowhard talking about how it's a fatherhood crisis within the Black community, they're wrong. It's actually a crisis within white community. And it's getting better. Like if you look across states, and it's different depending on the district, right? It's all very unique to different districts. But more and more, we're seeing the priority out of the courts for 50-50 custody.
Yeah.
And I think that's been really beautiful. And it's pushed guys because if it's just providing, those guys are kind of double incentivized to ignore their kids. I need to go make money, so I can't take the time with the kids. And if I don't make the money, I don't get to see my kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll take every other weekend
Mm-hmm.
to be there with my kid.
Right.
As opposed to, man, I'm 50-50. I can't make enough for childcare to cover the overtime. I better figure out a way to kind of coast in my career so I can be dad at home when I have my kids.
Yeah. Yeah, for
And
sure.
so that's where systems are forcing us into the ways that it should be.
Yep, absolutely. But I still see a lot of shame around that too, because of the
Oh, tons.
messaging we receive that,
Yeah.
and along the lines of what you were touching on in terms of, are you doing it well enough, or are you good enough father? Right. So that's something I do want to come back to as well that you've shared with me. But I do want to touch on this whole patriarchy thing. And you were talking about your military experience and the hierarchies that make it very
Mhm.
clear. How do you reconcile that with patriarchy, and how do we reconcile that in general for men, that there needs to be a hierarchy, but beyond what? And what I've been able to, at least for myself, create is hierarchy through a spiritual sense that's allowed me to
Mhm.
remain grounded and keep my life in order. But I do want to get your thoughts around that.
I've really moved towards an idea of masculinity needing to be about competence.
Mhm.
And so if you look across the world, right, women are largely considered a woman once they have their first period.
Yep.
And there are cultural traditions and expectations and whole things around now you're a woman. There is no such thing for men. There is no mutually agreed upon international thing where, like, when this happens, a boy moves to being a man. And in America, we have lost almost entirely any kind of thing where the minute that this happens, we know that that's a man. Because I'm sure at this point in your work, right, you've met very young 18-year-olds and you've met very old 18-year-olds.
Yes. Yeah.
There's a big range.
Yes.
And so I think it goes down to earned privilege versus unearned privilege.
Mhm.
And so patriarchy is about unearned privilege. It's that I'm a big, loud white guy. I show up and the room shuts up. And I'm so used to that. I just think I'm awesome. Right. Like I can walk into anything and do anything,
Yep.
as opposed to figuring out how to get good at something and then being appropriately loud about it. Like if you're a person that's called to speak, if you're a person that wants to step forward into leadership, get good at something before you try to go lead people.
Yep.
And I think that's the problem. And part of the Manosphere problem is this expectation, like a man's a leader. No, he's not. No, he's not.
Yeah.
A man is a person who can lead,
Right.
and he will feel better if he's leading somewhere.
Right.
But the idea that just like in every aspect of life, like if I'm a professional, like let's say I'm a CEO
Mhm.
and my spouse is the one that stays home and makes sure our family has everything together, what possible insight do I have for her on what like household appliance to buy,
Yep.
what school district to go into?
Mhm.
But I, as the man, I'm supposed to make those calls. It's asinine.
Yep.
And I think that's where I move a lot of my guys to. It's where I've certainly moved to.
Mhm.
It's part of why I feel so good about the podcast and the education I do, is because I've taken the time to get good at this.
Yes.
And as long as I can say, hey, that's out of my scope.
Mhm.
Like, hey, that's a topic that I'm not informed enough for you to care about my opinion on.
Yes. Yes.
Then it's okay. But I'm a 45-year-old white man, so I still slip every now and then,
Mhm.
right? Where I'm like, oh, you're interested in what I have to say? Of course I'm smart enough to know.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
dumb,
Right. Well, and I
but
think
it
that's
helps.
just an ongoing thing, right? And we touched on it earlier, having those opportunities to be challenged and receive feedback to identify your blind spots. But I do agree. I think there's that sense of entitlement that leadership just should be given to me. And I'm a firm believer that even within your home, between husband and wife, you're both leaders in different capacities. You're bringing different strengths to the table. One of the things I see that's missing in society nowadays is that whole concept of the rites of passage, where you enter
Mhm.
into that experience of saying, "Yeah, I I have experienced things, and now I can offer something to the world." And I didn't go through that. I went through it really late in life. I would say my rite of passage into the world was going through a divorce, which taught me a lot about myself and gave me a lot of insight into how to grow up in a way and what I would consider become a man. That's just been my personal experience and how I've dealt with it. But that's also missing. I think we don't have these opportunities for men to experience certain things that allows them to learn and hold themselves accountable.
Yeah, and I think that's only going to get worse for a while. As we reduce the need for labor,
Yeah,
and as providing roles gets more and more scarce, we're going to have a lot of disenfranchised, unengaged men.
yeah,
And the most dangerous places in the world where all of the violence and bad things happen are
yeah,
where there are large populations of disenfranchised young men, because someone will come in and take advantage
yeah.
of that and aim those boys at something for
Yes,
their gain.
yeah,
And man, I'm not a politician or an economist. I don't know what to do about all this. I'm terrified
yeah,
of the loss of provider as a role at all, because it's the one that most guys agree on. Like whatever else I am, I need to have the ability to be a provider. Even if me and my spouse choose for me not to be it,
mhm,
the one thing every man looks at another man and says, "What do you do for a living?" That is the first question any grown man asks another grown man.
yeah,
And as labor goes away and we're not making a living anymore,
mhm,
what happens? Where's our role? And I don't know, man. I like the basic income and things like that. I would love it if we just reduced hours,
mhm,
right, to where people could be dads and have communities
yeah,
and stuff. But it's America. We are not going to do that.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I do want to tie the two things you just said to earlier comments you also made. So the whole Andrew Tate type of phenomena, right? And you've got men who lack meaning in their lives, and then they've been told that through the Me Too movement that there are certain ways you can get in trouble, right? There's
Mhm.
risk. So why expose yourself to that risk? Why not do like just stay away from women? So you see a lot of that happening, and then you have people like Andrew Tate who come on and then they tend to give these boys or men direction in life where they feel like they can create meaning. That is also I guess in the background, that's what's happening in terms of the problems we're seeing with the disenfranchisement, right?
Well, and it's a long, long running story in
Yeah,
America.
yeah,
I mean, the whole like how we whitewashed the West,
yeah,
right? Where rather than armies and sketchy tactics, it was individual homesteaders fighting off brown people to reclaim the West.
yeah,
Usually one guy with a gun, right? We've had this story about the best men and the men to be most in admiration of are the ones that can operate solo and don't need anybody or don't need any connection. And I think like the arc of the book that I'm trying to write is this idea on how that was built and how it's gotten so bad
mhm,
and how it's crashed. Like this is the consequence of
mhm,
generations of guys being convinced that connection is not the way forward,
yeah,
that competency, isolation, and power are the way forward.
yeah,
And not everybody can have power. And no one should have power in all aspects of their life.
yeah,
So I think that's the tragic thing is that and it's really been weaponized. I think of all the people, we talk a lot about Andrew Tates and these guys that are monstrous, but Steve Bannon's probably the biggest. He's actively spoke about how his whole strategy was those guys in the basements and how to reach them.
mhm,
And he's been pretty honest about how dishonest he will be to get to them.
yep,
And that's part of where it got put now,
yep,
right? That's what worked. And it's going to keep getting worse until we do something different.
mhm,
I think the hardest thing for a lot of my colleagues in the interpersonal violence space to understand is most people are not motivated by empathy for others. Most people are motivated by having an experience and being able to relate to others. So think about like 15 years ago when all of a sudden we had a bunch of old, cranky Republican white senators
mhm,
go to their first gay wedding with a nephew or something. And they'd be like, my gosh, it's just a wedding.
yeah,
And then all of a sudden they're voting for gay marriage
Mhm.
because now it's touched their life. And everybody was like, why did it take that for this guy to do that? Because it's what most people take to change a mind. Most people do not have the capacity for transformative empathy.
Right.
Most people are just living their life.
Mhm.
And so when we talk about these disenfranchised men, it's really hard for them to hear about the plight of women when no one is paying attention or listening to their plight.
Right.
And the problems that cause the problems for women are the same problems for the men.
Mhm.
If we can get to their end of it, of like, hey, this is how this is hurting you. And yeah, this is impacting them too. There's a lot of reasons to fight for this, but this is how it hurts you.
Yes.
People are much more likely to engage proactively.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And some of the things you shared with me was how can men reclaim these traits without shame,
Mhm.
right? So we've touched on it, but
Yeah.
how is that messaging coming across from your end?
So I'm actually presenting on it on the state conference on how clinicians can organize this.
Mhm.
But essentially, it's giving men cultural outlets. These traits exist. And I feel like if you look at the average person, right, they'll have two of those gendered traits that they really resonate with.
Mhm.
One that they're like, yeah, that's part of me. And then one that they're just like, that's not a thing for me. Right. And so if we don't give channels for these aspects, right, these guys are going to, someone's going to tell them where to put it
Yeah.
and it's going to go really badly.
Yeah.
And so the way to navigate that is the big push for status is to do what with? Okay, you're a status driven guy. You want to be seen and
Mhm.
you want to be seen as someone that people look to. For what purpose?
Mhm.
Not just being seen. Who are you trying to serve? What's the way forward, right? Status through service is generally what I kind of try to push. And every culture has a way to do that. And so it doesn't even have to be mine as the clinicians. In fact, it really shouldn't be. It needs to be their culture.
Right.
For more sexual, there's healthy sexuality,
Mhm.
right? When we talk about women who are hypersexual, everybody talks about female empowerment. But when a man's like that, they're like, what a pervert.
Yeah.
It's about aiming it. How you're using your sexuality to connect with people that matter to you,
Yeah.
right? How do you connect these two things? How do you brace this visceral desire in you
Mhm.
to being connected with people that are worth being connected to and that you can love?
Mhm.
Whatever that looks like, right? Doesn't matter whether it's poly, doesn't matter. There's dozens of ways to be about that,
Yeah.
but move it towards connection.
Yeah.
For more physically aggressive, okay, this is why so many middle-aged guys after a divorce end up in jujitsu. All right. Uh, we have to find outlets for guys to feel like they have space to compete
Yes.
and space to win or lose and space to grow. For me, that was competitive video gaming. I was a top 20 player in the US in League of Legends because I wasted a lot of my life getting there. And I was in my 40s crushing teenagers at a video game. It felt really good,
Yeah.
right? For other guys, it's the basketball court.
Right.
For the guys that it's really big in, that it's a huge part of them, those are the guys that you want in
Mhm.
like special operations. You want them in the military. You want them serving as police. You want them serving as firefighters. You want them in places where they're able to go find the other guys trying to hurt their community
Mhm.
and be a brace against it. Those guys want something to push on to be of service to.
Mhm.
And if you don't give it to them, they're going to go round. They're going to go
Yeah.
bar fight. It's going to come out somewhere else.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's where your perspective around power can shift, that it doesn't have to be through being a tyrant or through material acquisitions, it's through service,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's where that beauty comes in. And I agree. I think even with the sexual energy, you have to channel it into healthy ways. And what I realized was through creating, and that could be
Mhm.
just creative work, pursuing things. How do you channel that energy into things that allow you to grow? Otherwise, if again, if it's not in a healthy space, then you're just acting it out in different ways, which is not serving you, nor is it serving the community that you're a part of. So I
Yeah,
definitely
it's
see
been
that.
really interesting. So when I opened up my practice, I put men's issues on my website. And when I did that, I was thinking like masculinity, fatherhood, men's stuff.
Yeah.
Instead, what I got a lot of calls are, hey man, why doesn't my penis work? And so I very quickly had to consult a lot with different sex therapists and get different ways on how to help guys with these issues. And it's been really interesting because if you look at like perspective on kink, like when I was young and very sexual, I was in those spaces,
Yep.
but it was all about sex. Now, here we are 25 years later. I just had a kink therapist on the podcast to talk about it. And kink is about all the different ways that sexuality touches your world and your kind of weird, fun way to play.
Yeah.
And everybody's got a little one somewhere,
Yes.
right? But what's yours? And maybe it's creative writing, right? I'm a narrative therapist. A lot of my guys end up writing something down,
Right.
right? Um, I think, what is it? I mean, you probably know this data better than me, but I recently heard that after the gym, having a hobby is the second best way to protect happiness.
Mm.
Like some kind of creative hobby where you're actually producing something at
Yeah.
the end of it that isn't for money, that just is for you.
Right.
And, there's plenty of people who write erotic, whatever, right?
Yeah.
It's probably the most flooded market of authors, and it's hilarious and wonderful.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think finding that opportunity to be creative is huge, right? And I think a lot of men don't put that much emphasis because they're so focused on being that provider or
Yeah.
rescuer, protector, and it's like, well, where's your outlet for creativity?
Yeah. I really like how Scott Galloway put it. And we kind of grew up where the whole story was find something you love and you never work a day in your life, which is garbage,
Yeah.
by the way. I love my work.
Yes.
I work very hard and I'm very tired.
Yep. 100%. Yeah.
It's nonsense.
Yeah.
But his line is we keep trying to turn hobbies into jobs
Yeah.
and we devalue the hobby. Hobby is about connection, like
Yeah.
going out and doing something like us having this conversation as podcasters. Man, I felt so much more connected to a broader community just in 3 months of podcasting
Mhm.
than I did as a clinician for the last 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've taught thousands of people. Like
Mm.
this is better
Yeah.
for me on an interpersonal level.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. I think you have to consistently look for ways to create that connection. And we all look for it, right? And you see why teenage boys are so susceptible to joining gangs or getting into some of those other
They
things.
have a rite of passage and a path to respect.
Yeah. Yeah. Connection's huge. Absolutely. Now, the other thing was in your space in terms of the clinical work you do, what are the tools that you're helping men with to channel some of these things we're talking about, whether it's healthy identity, whether it's connection? What are some of those practical tools?
So the practical tools, I really like DBT. I think that it was probably the best magpie tool development of the last 20 years where she literally looked at all the different operating modalities and made a workbook that is crayon simple.
Yeah.
People need simple things to make hard things doable,
Yeah.
whatever that is for somebody.
Hmm.
And I'm sure you've run into this as a clinician. Very rarely do I give somebody the tool that works.
Right.
We throw a bunch at the wall. Some bits of what I bring work, and something that they used to do that one of these things reminded them of works. And so the first thing is building some kind of awareness of what's happening to you.
Hmm.
So that way you can get a pause in and make a choice. Most of the time, the more severe the mental health struggle, the less choice people have. So if they're dealing with a severe case of anxiety where they're having panic attacks throughout their week, those people feel like I don't have choices. This is my life
Yeah.
and this is where I live and it's awful.
Hmm.
And the reality is if you look at your life with the right lens, you can see where these patterns start before they start to hit. And that's where the awareness building gets. All you need is a 1-second decision to try something different to entirely change how something impacts you.
Yeah.
The other thing that I really push is I hate how pop culture has taken clinical things and made them simple. Stress is not anxiety. Sadness is not depression. Anger is not toxic.
Hmm.
I am so sick of the idea, and I see it all the time. People come in thinking they have anxiety because they're stressed.
Right.
Man, I've got so much to do. I've got my kids, I've got my job, and I feel this need that I need to be doing stuff all the time for it. Good.
Yeah.
You do have kids. You do have a job. Now let's talk about how to like, where did that caps off? Where does the overwhelm happen? Where does the burnout happen?
Yeah.
When does stress click into anxiety? That's a very important discussion.
Yes.
But stress is incredibly important for just a good life.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's particularly for guys. Guys need action. We need to do things. We
Yeah.
need our work to be of service in some way.
Mhm.
After that, it's mostly just communication skills. Guys have been incredibly misserved on how to identify and communicate emotion. The biggest complaint I get, I'm usually, if they're first responders or veterans, I'm often their first therapist. But if they're coming to me otherwise, I'm usually the second or third therapist they go to because I'm not cheap, right? And they need a specialist. And the big thing is they go to a clinical session and they sit down across from a woman. And I know some of the clinicians that refer to me. They're not bad clinicians anyway. They're women that can work with men.
Mhm.
But guys have been so convinced that if they come and talk about an emotional thing with somebody, they're going to get told they're doing it wrong.
Right.
Instead of teaching them multiple avenues for the same information.
Mhm.
So when a guy gets broken up with, he will not say, I felt so betrayed. I felt so hurt. I feel this emptiness and sadness in me after this woman leaves. What they say is, she ripped my heart out.
Mm.
And that's also an accurate description of what that feels like.
Mhm.
I had a trauma clinician on who's also a couples therapist, and I love how he framed it. The big push in couples therapy now is, rather than saying an emotion, it's saying, that feeling when?
Mhm.
That feeling when you get the perfect cup of coffee? That feeling when your partner didn't hear you?
Yeah.
That feeling? And all of a sudden, everybody knows what that's like, and they might use different language to describe it, but we've all been broken up with, hopefully.
Yeah.
And so I think the big thing is convincing clinicians to meet patients where they can describe what's happening to them, and understanding that that is a valid form of communication for what is happening to them. And then, yes, add to it. They need to be able to share their experience with others. They need to be able to describe that to them, their own experience to themselves, developing around educational content on empathetic language is huge for guys to give them a more cognitive brace on what they're feeling. But you got to start with, yeah, man, she ripped your heart out. I get it.
Mhm.
I've been there.
Yeah.
We've all been there. It sucks.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that, Tim. Now, thank you so much for coming on here and sharing not only your personal experiences, but all the amazing work you're doing. So, for listeners that want to learn more about you, your work, I know we've touched on the podcast. What are some ways they can do that?
So the podcast is probably the easiest to find, AmericanMasculinity.com. Again, I am not sure how that wasn't already taken, but I'm incredibly happy about that.
Yeah.
And then I'll give you a link tree that will have access to, if they're in Colorado and you're looking for clinical help, if you're looking for education for your center, all that'll be on my professional website, www.empoweredchangece.com. That's a hard thing to remember.
Yeah.
Let's just go through the link tree. It's going to be
Yeah.
easier.
We'll definitely put all of that in the show notes. But thanks again, Tim. Really appreciate your time today and really enjoyed this discussion.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for the work you're doing in the world, man.
Thank you. You as well.